Hey guys, Stockaholics. Thank you guys for being here today. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about different commodities. I wanted to kind of go through some of them, share my thoughts. Um, I have a poker background, so I like to identify some patterns. One of the patterns, by the way, that I've noticed with a lot of people that are heavily involved in the resource sector or commodities in general, softs, hards, whatever, they have narratives. It's very strong narratives in commodity space. Maybe that's true for all investors, but I noticed this especially with commodity investors. And by the way, I think narratives are great. I think, you need a reason to buy and sell something. I'm no problem with that. I do that a lot. But narratives don't necessarily take into account price. And when you're talking about commodities, you really cannot be too fixated on a narrative. Um, because inevitably, in cyclicals and commodities, they're going to go up and they're going to go down. It's just the nature of the beast, right? So that's why I like this picture here. What we would try to do is we would buy low and sell high. It sounds easy in practice, but in reality, it's a lot harder than it looks. And one thing I don't like about this picture is that it suggests that we're going to be buying the very bottom and be selling the very top. That's not successful investing doesn't rarely looks like this. It's going to be looking like purchasing maybe somewhere over here and maybe selling somewhere over here. You're going to be capturing the meat in a move. You're not going to be capturing the entire move. And you may not be buying all at once. You may be buying in several places. But there is one thing that I liked about this picture, and that's why I chose it today. And that it also suggests that even though you may be selling what you think is a high, the high can get a lot higher. That doesn't mean that you made a mistake in selling. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your narrative, the reason that you are holding a commodity or you bought it, is correct either. In the last couple of years, yeah, I guess it's getting close to a couple of years now, in the Cerveza situation, we are noticing that a lot of the commodity price movements has been dictated by supply shortages. The longer we try and play a game where we're trying to hold on to uh, uh, these commodities and these commodity related stocks that are, in my opinion, in very short-term supply shortages, the more and more risk that we are taking. I wanted to start talking about lumber. This is one of the commodities that I definitely got correct. This is one of those like when I called the top. This is one. I was probably, if not on the day that it peaked, I was very, very close to it. That doesn't mean that I knew that that was actually the day of the peak. I just got lucky. I just knew the things was just when I was looking at it, just looked absurdly expensive. There are some other things that I thought were absurdly expensive, but they've persisted in being expensive. That doesn't mean that my thoughts on them going up or going down has changed. I'm still bearish because they're still overpriced, in my opinion. Now, I wanted to look at lumber though because I thought it's interesting. Lumber for the last 25 or so years has largely been trading in a range between 200 and 400 per thousand board feet. Okay, and there's a few periods where it exceeded that range, but this is very interesting. Like I could maybe someday if I decided to go to a university and get a master's degree in economics, which if I ever did, that would be why I would go there. Although I don't see that there's much value in it. I'm digressing again. Lumber during the pandemic was very, very interesting. When the Cerveza pandemic first started, there were the lockdowns that started in the United States. And what you noticed with a lot of people, they were stuck at home. They didn't know what to do with themselves. So, and Home Depot and all these places that you can buy lumber, they weren't closed either. So originally, what a lot of people did is they went to these lumber outlets and they purchased a lot of lumber. They went and did some home remodeling. They maybe built a fence. They did various things while they were stuck at home, right? Um, at the same time, the lumber producers, the mills in different places in Canada, United States, and elsewhere in the world, they shut down because at the same time they said we cannot produce lumber because home building is likely to be restricted. There's going to be less demand. So there was both a demand increase in this commodity, and at the same time, there was on the supply side there was a constriction because there was there was an different behaviors happening on both sides of the equation. There were also some things that happened where there was just very strange things in terms of like housing behaviors, where a lot of people were leaving cities, maybe because of the cerveza illness, maybe because of policies in these. I'm not going to get too deep into politics in this video, especially in left-leaning states. You can look this up on the internet. A lot of people went from these big cities on the coasts, a lot of left-leaning states, and then they moved into the south and some other places. And they were interested in suburban housing, which also caused the prices of housing to skyrocket. At the same time, you saw the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates. You saw stimulus. It was just kind of like the perfect storm for lumber. And it did dip over here. And then when all of these things really started coming to fruition, it just went to just an absurd, absurd, absurd high. What I found very fascinating is that when you started getting into these very high ranges of lumber, you started seeing some weird behaviors in terms of people buying lumber. There were people that were going out, and this is not this is just like an absurd thing under normal conditions. There were, I mean, this is when wasn't a lot of people doing this, but there was a fraction of people going out. They were purchasing lumber as an investment. They were buying lumber because, okay, lumber's going up. I'm going to buy some lumber, and then in some point in the near future, I'm going to sell it for more. That was just one very strange behavior that I saw. There's some other things when you think about contractors, right? With this extreme tightness in the supply of lumber, there were certain people that needed to have it. They were willing to pay almost any price, and there were certain home buyers that came from these higher income states moving to lower income states that would pay any price for housing. So they would it says they would there was both new buildings. It was just kind of like I said, it's a perfect storm. There's a lot of things a lot of things happening all at once. What was interesting though, when you start to see this hoarding behavior, both from investors and you start to see it from contractors, that pushed it, like I said, even further. But there was a point when you think about the supply side, when these mills started seeing this insane price in lumber, a lot of mills got reactivated. The price of mills just went through the roof. I was watching YouTube channels where people were trying to buy mills. By the way, this is not when you want to buy a mill during a supply shortage, because eventually the price of lumber is going to go down. But the average person, they don't think about this stuff, right? When there was all these people hoarding lumber, there were people who were at the same time, when you get to these prices, no longer willing to pay these prices. You think about your John and Jane Doe down here who wanted to purchase lumber to build a fence. The amount of people that were willing to do home projects when the price of lumber is quadrupled, quintupled, etc., shrinks a lot. And at the same time, you start to see supply just drastically hit the market. We started to see Chinese lumber hit the market. Which under normal conditions wouldn't hit the market. By the way, that might also be a reason why, just thinking about this now, you start to see shipping prices go so high too, right? You also see Canadian lumber hit the market. You see European market hit the market in the United States. And then you also see American mills just ramping up production, right? So what quickly went from a supply shortage actually turned into a supply glut in lumber. And by the way, there was a lot of narratives that you would have heard all the way up. And one of the things I noticed in a lot of these narratives is that they were not reflective of the actual situation. They were none of the supply shortage or of a looming supply glut, which inevitably happens in a lot of these situations. But when you listen to a lot of the mainstream kind of like I don't know, financial outlets, they were attributing this to like demographics and things like, well, the millennial population is looking for housing. There's not enough housing. And, compared to the boomer population, which was the biggest population below the millennials, there's just not enough housing. And, this is a true narrative. This isn't false, right? Which is why you really cannot stick to these kinds of ideas. This is not what caused this, though. It wasn't a significant demographic shift. You might suggest that that might be a reason why there might be elevated lumber for longer in the future. But for these kinds of lumber prices to be sustained in the short term, that being an excuse is just a ridiculous idea, in my opinion. Okay, I wanted to look a little bit at copper. Copper is something that I follow a little bit closer than some of the other commodities. When I called the top perfectly in, in lumber, I also was calling for a top in copper. So, and that one, I think this one, the top that I called in copper, might be a little bit more debatable because copper has, the price of it has, it's been pretty resilient. Although it has been lower than when I called for the peak, it is, it's been resilient. Now I can go on and on about copper. I think there's supply that can come on just like before. There's also been issues that have been taking place in Chile and Peru over the last year, especially with cerveza related issues. But I'm of the view that copper is expensive, and people don't like to hear that. Okay, just because the I mean, look at the chart. How you're gonna say that copper is cheap? Yeah, okay, I get it, right? There's a narrative. Electric vehicles, electrification. The Western zeitgeist says that we're gonna need to build all of these things to counteract climate change. There are firm believers, and then there are the people out there who say, you know what, I don't believe in this at all, but I can exploit this to make a buck, and I get that. I love that narrative when we're at $2, we're at $2.5 copper, maybe even $3 copper, but we're getting at $4, we're getting approaching $5 copper. That narrative's not for me anymore, okay? And you look at sometimes in the past, even over here in 2011, yeah, it took a while for this commodity to start to go down. I think copper is expensive. I think that, hey, tomorrow it could go to $5. Maybe there's something that happens in the world, it goes to $6. But this is just like all lumber. It's a supply shortage. This is not because everybody's going out and buying Teslas. It's not because we're building, charging stations across the United States right now. Yeah, there's going to be the, what do you call them? The packages in Congress in the United States and other various Western economies in the world that, yeah, they're going to spend a lot of money on copper, but that's not what's driving copper price right now. Okay, so I cannot own copper. I did own copper earlier in 2020, and I bought it. Was buying the dip down here. I bought the rip even over here when it was exceeding 2019 levels. Yeah, I bought into the narrative, right? But I didn't attach myself to narratives. And by the way, I didn't sell the peak either. I was up here, maybe I sold some up here, and I sold some maybe somewhere in here. And then the price went up. And when I looked at some of these stocks and they went up, some of them doubled beyond where I was selling them. Yeah, it felt lousy, right? I was like, damn, man, I could have made, another double on this, right? But I made a lot of money on this trade. I made, some of these copper stocks I bought tripled, some of them quadrupled, one of them quintupled, and one of them doubled. Okay, so I made a lot of money on this trade. There will be a time in the future when I will buy copper again, I guarantee you. There will be a time in the future where I'll be spouting the same narrative that a lot of other people are spouting. But the difference between spouting that narrative and $2 and when copper's $4.5 per pound. That narrative changes drastically for me. Okay, when I am interested in investing in different commodities, yes, number one, I am fascinated by ideas. I like to go and just look at things and learn about them. But, from an investment perspective, I want to think about how I can make money from whatever it is that I'm learning about, right? And, I like learning about crude oil. There's other people out there that spend their whole lives trying to figure out what where the price of crude oil is going to go. And I might fall in that camp too, but it's maybe just because it's fun for me to figure that out, right? But there's a lot of commodities, okay? And there are some that are more expensive than others. When I am interested in learning about different things in commodity related space, yeah, it's probably going to, like I said, it's going to be for an investment case. So what that means is I want to look at commodities that are cheap. And I know those are the ones that I really want to learn about. If I get it right and I learn something about the supply and demand of that, I learn about some various geopolitical factors that affect it. They get complicated, by the way, yeah. But if I get it right and it's real cheap, my upside is great. And if I get it wrong when it's real cheap, my downside is a lot less. It's a lot lower. You just think if you were buying lumber at the peak compared to some of where it went. It's down 80% or something like that, right? So, but when you're looking at a lot of commodities today, and we're gonna look at some of them, there's not a lot that's cheap right now, okay? And there's a lot of people out there that are going to say, that's because of the dollar and that's because of inflation and all that. And I sympathize, I agree with some of that to some extent, but maybe I can explain why I think that a lot of this, and the Fed also thinks that a lot of this is transitory. If you look at what happened with lumber, it collapsed, right? The price of it. It's still a little bit elevated to its traditional range, but it's nowhere near where it is today. Now, when we're looking at some of these other commodities, you're going to see that a lot of these are not cheap. Now, one of the ones I follow very closely, I made a few videos on crude oil. Um, it's to me, it's in the upper range of price into under the normal supply and demand curve. Okay, I made a video saying that I think that the normal price under normal conditions for oil is going to be somewhere between $50 and $60. That doesn't mean it can't go much higher from here. And my oil stocks, I'm not selling them. Okay, it is in the upper range. Not interested in selling right now. Okay, if it gets much more expensive, you'll be damn sure. Yes, I will be. Now, I really wanted to show you guys natty gas, natural gas. Um, let's see. Right now, if you look at a 5-year range, we're getting up there. Okay, I own a stock called Gazprom. If you look at the share price of Gazprom, I made some pretty good money on this investment. Gotten some dividends along the way. It's getting up there. The chance that I'm going to be lightening up on this where we are now, pretty likely. But if you look at the history of natty gas, there's some dramatic spikes. This is that, again, right here is that 2003, 2008 super cycle. And you can see this in a lot of commodities. By the way, when you look at these commodities, I think if you go through these and you just look at some of these graphs for really long periods of time, you really get an appreciation for the global financial crisis. Because in the United States, we think about this in terms of the banking system. When you look at these commodities, just literally everything was going absolutely bananas. And you almost think when you look at these, it's like, thank God there was a recession, because if there wasn't a recession, so many people would have just gotten screwed by these absolutely insane prices. And quite frankly, it's very likely that these high prices caused it. Maybe some of that, yes, came from the banking system, but there's other sources of that what caused that GFC for sure. Okay, let's look at some other commodities. Gold, silver, it's more monetary based, so it gets very complicated over there. There is some supply and demand to these things. I made a video on them, but it does get more complicated. Let's look at coal, right? Bro, like coal, Coal's like the new Bitcoin. And you just imagine this, like a year ago, when people were talking about Tesla, people were talking about all of these ESG related things, and you'd find that the price of coal tripled. If you told these people that the price of the coal was going to triple in a year, they would have gone bananas. But there's people out there that have had narratives that say, you know what, there is a reason coal is going to go up. And those people have made a lot of money. It was a hated sector, but the price of coal just it tripled. Now that doesn't mean, where coal is right now, I'm super excited about the prospects of coal. I'm not going to be going out there but if you listen to some people that are heavily involved in the coal space and any commodity space, they'll come up with their narrative. They don't abandon their narrative at these kinds of prices. The same thing that can happen with lumber is very likely to happen with all of these commodities. And yes, just because the equity valuations in a lot of these producers is lower than their historical norms in terms of like the broad stock market, that's not a great reason, in my opinion, to be investing in cyclicals at all-time highs. And there's a lot of people out there that I guarantee you, who maybe some of these people, some of you guys, no disrespect, hopefully you guys can learn something from this video, that are out there buying coal right now. And I think that's a terrible investment at the current prices. And some of you guys might argue, yes, and it'll go up to 200, it'll go to 250. You could be absolutely correct. But why play that game? Why not buy coal when it's at 50? Right? Why buy it 170 hoping to go to 250? The margin of safety is gone. You're gambling, okay? Let's look at some other ones. Oh, you look at a lot of softs. Oh, soybeans is an interesting one, I think. Let's look at soybeans. Another one. Oh my goodness, dude, soybeans. There's a lot of reasons for this. By the way, there was a lot of flooding that took place in China last year. Besides just the cerveza pandemic that took place, plenty of issues that took place in all kinds of soft commodities. By the way, soft commodities are like a lot of your greens, your orange juice, a lot of farming related stuff, okay? But you look at this chart, soybeans. If I was going to get interested in getting involved in soybeans, which way do you think this chart is going to go? I mean, I'm not a technical expert, but I think that this is one of those things that they would define as a head and shoulders here, right? And you can see that the price of soybeans is extremely elevated. Now, I think about this on a fundamental basis, right? Let's imagine you're a farmer, right? Do farmers go and study all of these cycles on, on crops? If they did, they might not be out there planting soybeans right now. But you know what they are doing right now? They're out there planting soybeans. And they've been doing that since it started getting elevated, right? So the crop of soybean takes a while to grow. Eventually, those will all be in a stage in which they will be harvested. And just like lumber, there'll be a stage in which there are too many soybeans on the market. And yeah, you might have a narrative that says, there's going to be a lot of global warming issues or vice versa. There's whatever, right? That's going to cause all of these grains things to go up. Why play that game? Why not just buy soybeans when nobody's interested in buying soybeans? Okay, when nobody's talking about soybeans. Let's look at wheat. Wheat has been, oh, I like this one because you can see, oh no, that's 1 year. Okay, same thing. What I like about soybeans, there's a lot of volatility, or not soybeans, wheat. There's a lot of volatility in this. I don't know a lot about wheat, but I may learn a little bit more about this because I like, my cyclical brain is seeing some very distinct patterns in wheat. When you see these big jumps up and down. But the same thing when you saw in China. China's a huge population, it is growing middle class. They have a lot of people that are interested in meat. When they had something with their swines, a year ago or so, they had swine flu, something like that, where it killed off significant populations of their herds. They had to try and acquire different grain-related things to feed their what do you call cattle? Their pigs and cattle, whatever. They had to get food for their pigs, and there were certain crops, I think corn if we can find corn in here, that there was just getting very, very expensive. There it is. And they had to try and find other things to feed their cattle or their, their pigs. What do you, let me know in the comments, what do you call a herd of pigs? That it was, they couldn't do it because it's just like, why would you feed your pigs corn? Because the price of corn is like freaking doubled and getting close to tripled. So they're trying to find alternate foods. The issue with corn caused the shortage with corn caused issues in other commodities, right? And this is another one. It's like, you look at this chart, it looks like, and I'm not a technical expert, right? You know, I like the fundamentals because the fundamentals lead the technicals. The technicals are just the way that you can explain fundamentals, right? On a non-educated basis. This looks like another Head and Shoulders, right? What do you think this price is going to do, right? Iron ore. Let's look at iron ore. Where do you think this one's going? We went to 220. It looks like we're in the bottoming, where the roller coaster is going the other way. This looks like we're halfway down the same thing that happened with lumber, right? There were issues with lockdowns in Australia. There were because of the cerveza. This is the pattern that I want to let you guys, to hopefully impart on you guys. The cerveza and the other related issues have caused so many commodities to go bananas. And that's not a permanent thing. That's not a super cycle. That's not the narratives that you hear on a lot of these mainstream outlets. These are supply shortages. And this is why the Fed says a lot of these things are transitory in terms of inflation. By the way, one more rant. Transitory doesn't mean that all this inflation is going to get reversed. That means that the inflation rate is going to head into disinflation. Disinflation means that the rate of inflation is going to go down over time. That's what I view. Yes, there's going to be inflation. Yes, there's going to be small levels of inflation for long periods of time. If you look at a chart of inflation for very long periods of time, in the United States and the dollar, it's been averaging very low rates for the last 20 or 30 years. Do you think that anything different is going to happen? Maybe, you know, maybe Peter Schiff and all these people are right. But what is more likely, right? That's where I'm coming from. What is more likely? What are the odds? I tell you, I come from a poker background, right? There are winning strategies, there are losing strategies. Just because a losing strategy wins once in a while doesn't make it a long-term winning strategy. And I hope that's what I can impart. I'm never going to stick to a narrative, especially in commodities, when those cyclicals and what I mean by these commodities get expensive, because inevitably the same thing will happen in lumber. Supply shortages get resolved. The price becomes inhibitive of new people coming in to buy, and it also becomes supportive of supply hitting the market. Shortages eventually turn into gluts.